All right, Roger, we've covered quite a bit. I think there's just a few more details that we've been talking about that I think would be great to get out.
Okay.
I think probably one of the most surprising to me is you talked about you and your siblings and where you were delivered.
Yeah, we were all born at home. Dr. Vasco delivered all of us. And I knew something was up. I know when my brother Rich was born, I had to go and sleep overnight at my friend's uncle's house. So we went there. So I knew that something was coming up. So the next morning I had a baby brother.
So is it the same? It was always the same doctor that
Yes.
would come to the house?
Yeah.
And was he by himself, or did he bring helpers
No,
along?
no, it's by himself. And then my mother would have, I guess you'd call it a midwife, that would come into the house for a couple of weeks to help until she got strong enough, and then she took care of the kid. We had a baby bed in the bedroom. And
Is that right?
Yeah.
So the midwife, was that part of the hospital
no,
process?
that was just an 18-year-old girl.
Oh, so she
Yeah.
would just bring in
Yeah,
help
and
for
we'd make
people.
arrangements, and that was part of her operation. She would do that. It worked out good.
Yeah. So do you recall, as far as insurance, was the health industry like it is today, or how is it different besides the home visits?
We didn't have insurance at that time, but I don't know what it cost for a baby. I suppose $30 you can have a baby. I really don't know.
So they just paid for it.
They just paid for it and put it on the bill and paid for it 50 cents a time, whatever.
At the grocery store.
Yeah, that's right. So I really don't know that, but we didn't have any insurance.
Speaking of doctors, you had mentioned your sister had an ankle injury.
Oh yeah, she was a conniver. I think that was Hazel, and she sprained her ankle, and it swelled up and it colored, and she had her sister Carol pull her all over with the coaster wagon in the summer. She couldn't walk, and as the days progressed, she would take crayons and color her ankle different colors: green, purple, and red, and everything else. And she had everybody suckered into a real bad sprained ankle.
She didn't want to give up the service.
No, she thought that was pretty nice.
First class. Good. Speaking of injuries, you had mentioned a discipline story.
Oh, Ivy Wolter, yeah, he was my best buddy in school, and this was in 6th grade. He was sitting in the front row. I remember that, and he did something that the teacher didn't like. Maybe it's because he was the one accused of. We took some X-Lax and scraped the X-Lax off of it and gave her some chocolate one time. That was terrible. I wasn't. I wasn't part of that, of course. And Miss Lyman went up to Mr. Moulter and said, "Give me your ruler." And she gave him his ruler, and she said, "Hold out your hand." She wound up and going to slap his hand, and he pulled it back, and she broke his ruler on the desk. Everybody chuckled, of course. But
So did he get hit a second? Did she try to hit him again? Or was that
no, I think she went back to her desk. Ruby Larman was her name. Isn't it funny you remember all those names?
Well, you remember him. I'm not sure I could remember him. But so
we had 8 people in our 8th grade class. Eight people.
I know we'll talk about high school here in a bit. How many additional kids joined you in high school then?
We had 18 in our high school class.
So you almost doubled in size.
Yes, and that was the farm kids coming from farm. We still had a couple rural schools. We had West Side School, North Side School, South Side School. And that took care of the kids from the farming community, either walking to school or somebody taking them to school with horse and buggy. And of course, those rural schools disappeared. And then we had people coming in with school buses and so forth. But we didn't have any school buses when I was going to school.
Were horses used much for transportation? Did you see it much?
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. I was thinking we'd get into a church story later on, but we had a horse barn in back of church. It was kind of a lean-to. It was facing to the southeast, but it was protected on the west and the north. And the farmers would come in with their family with a cutter or a little horse cart and park their horse and cart in this horse barn, and then go to church, and after church they'll get in their horses and go back home. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And that horse barn was still there when I was going to that church. We'll get into that church later on. So
Why don't we jump into the church story now?
okay, In the rural community, churches were really important. I mean, everything was really built around the churches. You had your church suppers and Sunday school and Bible class and so forth. And we had a Reformed church in Cedar Grove, and we had a Presbyterian church. And we went to the Presbyterian church, and my friends went to the Reformed church. And over the years, like maybe 10 years' time, there a rift developed between groups in our church. We had a liberal group and a conservative group. We were part of the conservative group. And they had almost like a trial in our church on a Sunday after the service, and they asked our pastor, or the pastor, if he would renounce his beliefs and join the beliefs of the liberal faction, and he said no. And with that, about 30, 40 families got up and walked out. So,
and how many families total were there?
Well, we probably, over half of the people walked out of the church at the time, but at that time, the church denomination owned the building. So when we walked out of the church, we had lost our building because it belonged to the denomination. So here we were without a church, and I was setting up chairs with my dad in the village hall the next Sunday. And we met in the village hall, bought a piece of property on Union Avenue, and my dad was very active in this, and they dug the basement with kettle scrapers. I don't know, you know what a kettle scraper is? It's like a wheelbarrow with two little wheels underneath it, with a cutting blade in front and two handles, and the farmers would a lot of farmers in our church, bring their horses, and they dug the whole basement. It's the biggest church in Cedar Grove. Built a church, farmers would hold the handles and just cut whatever the horses could pull and fill up that kettle scraper, and then they would drop the handles, and then the weight would shift, and the little wheels would be used for transport, and the horses would go up to this big pile of dirt. When you got there, the farmer would lift up the handles, and they'd flip over, and they'd go back for another load. And the pastor even helped. I remember he had blisters all over his hands. My dad, I have pictures of him. I don't know if there's a picture in that group of pictures or not, but he was digging the footings. They dug the footings by hand. It was quite something. So now we didn't have any money to build a church, but we built the basement. And we covered the basement with tar paper, and we met in the basement of that church for 4 years, and we accumulated enough money, and we built a beautiful church, which is still there, and seats about 400 or 500 people, one of the biggest churches in town. So it was quite a story. Now, it really affected my life 35 years later when I came to Green Bay. We'll get into that with a subsequent session. But actually, we went through the same thing in Green Bay, building a church. We started out with 2 families. I'm getting ahead of myself. Another story later on. But we did a good job of separating church and state. The bosses in the plant where my dad worked were on the liberal side, and my dad was on the conservative side, but it never affected the relationship at work, so that was fine.
What about between the families that stayed at the original building and the families that went to the new one? Was there any hard feelings there?
There was some. It wasn't quite like the Kohler strike, for example, but there was some differences of opinion. But I think finally the people reverted back to the norm, and they said, let's just forget it, and you go your way and we go our way. Funny thing now, the church building that we left is now a conservative church. Anyhow, that was a big story. And of course, my dad was treasurer of the church. He was an elder, he was deacon and trustee, and I went through the same thing when we got up to Green Bay. Of course, I was even president of the trustees in Cedar Grove. So, anyhow.
How much of the church is original from when you guys built it back was it the 30s, late 30s?
Oh, we built in 36.
In 36?
Yeah, and the cornerstone was 1940. That's when they put the top on. So, and some rich spinster left some money, and then they built a Sunday school wing right onto the church. So it's a nice church. And then, maybe 5-8 years ago, maybe 10, they put an elevator in to take care of the people that couldn't handle it. So,
but the rest of it is still pretty much the way it was back
then? Yes. And that's on Union Avenue, the west end of Cedar Grove.
Very good.
And now there's 4 churches in Cedar Grove. There's The Reformed Church split. They have another church. And then the Presbyterian Church that we split away from. So that was the 4 churches. So.